today's video, I'm joined by Glenn Madden as we take a look at styled components, a CSS in JavaScript library created by Glenn and Max Stoiber. A massive thanks to Glenn for giving up his time to record this video. Glenn creates his own set of screencasts on Front End Center. It's an amazing resource and I highly recommend you checking it out. I'll leave a link in the description of the video. So Glenn, do you want to give like a very short intro, the kind of style components elevator pitch, if you like?
Yeah, sure. So style components came about because I wanted to see what was possible with a CSS in JavaScript library that didn't require any build configuration changes like CSS modules, which is a project I was involved with before. And from that, it kind of grew into what's now become quite a successful CSS and JavaScript library. It's the most popular one, and it supports React and Preact natively. It tries to be as similar as possible to CSS and use as much of the same knowledge as you know from CSS across in JavaScript.
Cool. So today, how we're going to do this? There's really nothing prepared. I haven't gone away and secretly learned style components. We've got the Create React app in front of us here. Glenn can see my screen as well. And what we thought we'd do is I'm going to try and move all the CSS that comes with the Create React app default that you can see now into styled components. So the rough idea is we'll get rid of all the CSS files and pull that CSS into our actual React components. I'm sure I'm going to make a lot of mistakes along the way, and Glenn can correct me as I get things wrong. And we'll just go from there, really. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually just add style components. I'll include links kind of in this post and in the YouTube video to all the references we'll use as well. So I've pulled up the style components website, and the first thing we have to do is install it. So I'm going to go ahead and yarn install it now. And so while that's going on in the background, the rough idea here with style components is that we use the tagged templates or template literals, which came in ES 2015 to write most of our CSS.
That's right.
And styled supplies kind of functions for each of the HTML elements we'd ever want to style that let us give it a tag template literal, and it can basically generate the CSS from there as such. That's kind of my rough
Yeah, that's right. In that tag template literal, it should feel as close as possible to writing SCSS effectively.
Okay.
So it's like CSS, but with the addition of nesting, basically, is the big thing from SCSS that comes across.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it full Sass or SCSS support, or just mainly the nesting?
Well, pretty much everything you can do with Sass or CSS, you can do with the JavaScript parts of style components. So in effect, it's a really close kind of match for what you could have done with SCSS, but only nesting is using the same syntax as SCSS. Yeah. Everything else is using JavaScript.
Cool. I've installed style components, so we'll come into here and let's just start. We can maybe start with this app div that kind of wraps around everything else and swap that out. So over here, I'll also pull up the CSS file. So yeah, so I'll kind of think out loud about how I'm approaching this, and Glenn, you can correct me or kind of drop tidbits of information as I need it, basically.
Sounds good.
So the first thing we can do is import styled, which I believe is just import styled from styled components, like so. And so the way I understand it is we have to make kind of new React components by using styled. So I'm going to say like app div. And again, I'm not sure on particular naming conventions and things, so that's something where I'd particularly like your input. But we'll do style.div, and then we give it a template literal like that. And in here, we're going to put effectively CSS. And then later down the line, we can add JavaScript to this and be dynamically change CSS based on certain properties. But effectively in here, we can just write almost regular CSS or Sass. Yeah. And style components will just do the rest for us, is my understanding.
Yeah, hopefully.
Fingers crossed. So for example, I'll just say text align center, which is replicating the CSS. And then just to kind of see it all working, we can say like color red, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that. So I've now created this React component called app div, which is just a regular div with this styling applied. And so now in theory, I should be able to replace this div with an app div and go down to the closing div down here and do the same thing. Look at that. And we do indeed have it in red, and it's
Yeah.
still text line centered as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm intrigued to see kind of what the output looks like. So behind the scenes, Style Components is kind of pulling that out and giving it a unique class name, which presumably is based on the hash of the styles to ensure that there's no collisions.
Yeah, it's based on each component will get a unique set of classes. So classes aren't shared between components, but the every instance of a component that's the same will share the class names. But these class names are driven off the hash of the contents. If there's for an advanced sort of use, there's a Babel plugin which will rename these to be driven off the same names that you used in your code. But that requires a little bit of config to set up.
Cool, nice. Well, I mean that was amazingly straightforward, which is awesome. So let's go, and I'll just basically repeat that a few times, and then obviously there's some CSS in the Create React app to do the spinner of the logo. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and we'll just keep cracking on really for now.
So one thing I can suggest is you can take the whole chunk of code, all 4 declarations, and actually just paste it straight in to the JavaScript thing, because each of the sets of properties and rules will come across straight, directly, and you can just change the names from being .app logo to const app logo equals styled div, or in that case, it's an image.
Okay, so I can take all this CSS and we'll put it into here, and then I'm going to replace this with const app logo equals style dot, and it is an image, isn't it? Style dot image, like that, and then swap that out like so, and then just kind of rinse and repeat that transformation. So app header is a div, style dot div. And when you're writing these, React component that has a few style components within it, is this typically where you'd put the actual styling? So you would have it above or in the same file as the component itself, or would you split these out?
Yeah, I think that's, and if we, I mean, that kind of leads nicely into the idea of how do you name these things, right? Because depending on what I'll just comment out the keyframes for the moment. We'll come back to that. But now you've got app div, app logo, app header, app intro. Whereas if they're all in this one file, then the fact that it's, that the word app is there is kind of redundant.
Yeah.
And so the idea that you get this kind of benefit by having them so close to each other that you can change the names, that they're now a lot more semantic because they're so local.
Yes. So in this case, you would drop the app prefix.
Yeah, and my outer div would be called outer or wrapper because that's the job that it's doing.
Great. Okay, so let's we'll make that change in a minute. So presumably, because I've got a style.image, but I can still pass through all the regular props I would expect to be able to give an image. So let's just save that and check that that's all working. In fact, I can delete all this CSS over here now, and I'm even going to go ahead and delete the import. Other than the spinner, which we've commented out, the keyframes for now, that's all looking great, and it's amazing to me just how straightforward that is to do. I knew it would be, but it's pretty impressive as a developer experience. Particularly in the days of things needing 29 Babel plugins to function, that I can just drop that library in and it just kind of works.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool. I know there's advanced things we can do if we do configure a couple of plugins and so on, but even just out of the box, that being so easy is amazing. It's great.
And that's one of the things we really kind of try to optimize for. I had this kind of use case in my head, which is that you might have half a day, you might have one afternoon to go through and play with this stuff. And the more stuff you can get done, then the more interesting parts of CSS and JS that you can start exploring. If you can convert lots of your components nice and quickly, and particularly if you can have people who know the CSS start, working on these components that use CSS and JavaScript, then you get a much quicker you get a lot more bang for your buck because everything's a lot more similar to what you expect.
Do you want to tackle the keyframes? Is that a good next step?
Yeah, that's a great next step. And so, well, maybe I let you look at the documentation and see if you can
Yeah, let's do that.
figure out the
Okay.
way.
All right. Okay. Well, so straight away I can see on the left we have animations, which sounds fairly relevant to us. So CSS animations aren't scoped to a single component, but we also supply a keyframes helper, which will generate a unique name for your keyframes, which we can then use. Okay. Okay, so we use keyframes to create this set of keyframes, and then we can pass it in as an animation to the thing we want to animate. What we'll do is given that I know it can't be the default export, I'm presuming it's keyframes like that.
Mhm.
And then, so let's create so then we say const, let's say logo spin, and then it's keyframes. And I think, if I remember rightly, in these backticks, I can just put these lines without the comments. And I think that is, let me just double check. Yeah, from and to. Okay, and then we're going to pass that in as an animation to the thing we're actually animating. So I guess I'd pass this into the, is it the image? Yeah. So our star.image would have this animation. Yeah, and we've already got app logo spin. And then I can just swap that out for logo spin. And at this point, I just need to move logo spin up the document because we're referencing it in logo. So I'll put that in there. I think that might be it. Look at that. Easy peasy. That's awesome.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
You're an expert
That's
already.
brilliant. Absolutely. Style components guru. After just, 10 minutes? That's awesome. Really cool.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that's actually a pretty good, I might just sort of interject, and this is the first time that you've used some JavaScript inside your CSS.
Yeah.
So if you're not familiar with the tag template literals, the backtick, the multi-line string, here using the $ squiggly brackets is a way of breaking from string mode into JavaScript mode. And the logo spin is actually just a string. It's just the keyframes, the generated animation name. And so that just gets concatenated like any other interpolation.
Yeah. And that seems to me like a really powerful idea that because all these helpers are just generating things that we can, keyframes generates a string that we can dump into somewhere else. That seems like it would be, I can imagine like having almost a module of all the different animations we might use across an app, and then just importing the ones we'd want into particular components. It seems like quite a powerful idea that you can just generate those animations like that.
Yeah, and you can take that whole animation line and break that into a helper as well, where you have, a collection of animation helpers, and you ask for the spin helper, and it could be a function that you pass 20 seconds to as an argument, and it generates you the CSS that needs to go there. Like once you start refactoring things into variables and helpers, you can really start to change your CSS.
Cool. Yeah, that's so as an example then, I would say like const spin animation, and here I'm just going to define a JavaScript function. So maybe it can take the time, which will default to 20. So it's just setting the argument to the function time will be 20 if it's not set by the user. So we won't. Would you return the animation part of the line, so animation colon, or would you just do the right?
Yeah, I would do the whole line. I think I think it makes sense to start thinking about chunks of styling, because you can go a bit further with this. You could have nesting, or you could have other things inside this helper. It doesn't just have to be a single property. Because these are just strings, it's really easy to refactor them at whatever level makes the most sense.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so if I just do that, I think that should work. Do I need a semicolon?
Yeah. We do have some automatic semicolon insertion, but it's best to know you're working with CSS, not JavaScript. So put them where they, where they need to go. We'll do what we can to help, but it's there's a lot more ambiguous cases than there are in JS.
Yeah, I can imagine. So all we've done here really is we've taken the idea that we can interpolate values in using the dollar and the curly braces, and rather than interpolating a string, which is what we were doing, we're just calling a function which is returning a string, and we're interpolating that in.
You could change the speed of the animation to make sure that everything's working as well.
Good point. Yeah. So let's go from 20 down to, let's do 2. I'm pretty sure that's working.
And so this is one of the things, that style components tries to lead you towards is this kind of gentle slope, where as soon as you can see something that you might refactor the way you might refactor a variable in JavaScript, you should be able to refactor into functions and variables in your CSS using these interpolations.
Already I can see that. I think for me, if I was about to use this every single day, which hopefully I may in the future, I can see that it would be a bit odd at first, and I'd probably need a bit of prompting, or like to be very to keep doing it, to get into the habit of doing it. But I can imagine it becoming second nature fairly quickly once you do kind of adjust to the idea that it's just strings that you can pull out, as you would if they were JavaScript React components, for example.
Yeah.
So I guess the final thing that's like a question to me as a beginner is how we might dynamically configure some CSS based on properties that are passed in.
Well, why don't we try, we could have two logos, one which is spinning the other direction, or you could have two headers, different colors or something.
Yeah, well, why don't we can do logos, and maybe we can pass in the time it should take to spin.
Sure. Yeah, and one spins fast and one spins slow.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to add the prop to the logo first, or I'll duplicate it, and I'm going to give it time. The first one can be 2, so it's nice and quick. The second one can be, let's go for 20, so back to our slightly slower one. So I'm going to go and check the docs, but from what I remember, you can also get you kind of can get at the properties in these tag templates using functions, I think. There we go. So I can already see pass props and adapting based on props. So I'm going to start with pass props. Oh, and they pass on all the props. Okay. Great. Okay, so we can pass in, rather than an actual static value for a style, we can pass in a function which takes all the props and go from there. Okay. So that seems fairly straightforward. Interesting. So really what I want to do is get at the property and pass it into the spin animation. Can I do that in here? Can I? No, I'm not going to be able to do that there.
This has actually turned into a really good example.
Yeah, this has. So I was under the impression I could just kind of casually be like, oh, props.time, but I don't think that's going to work.
That will work, but you need to get at props somehow.
And I do that by passing a function.
That's right.
And so what I'm wondering now is, do these functions always have to be on the right-hand side of a CSS declaration, or can I just have a function generate the whole line for me?
They can go anywhere.
They can go absolutely anywhere. So in theory, here then, this can become props, and it's going to call props.time like that.
Let's see.
Yeah, perfect. So we've got one going at 2 seconds and one at 20. So style components is basically seeing that we've given a function, and presumably it's just taking all the properties that this component has been given and calling that function and capturing its output as part of the outputted CSS.
Yeah, that's right. So basically, this is one of the most, the most unexpected parts, because if you use a normal string, a multi-line string, normal template string, then if you were to pass a function as an interpolation, then that function will just come back as a string. It will come back as function props spin animation. It'll write out, it'll to-string the function. What style components does is it, because there's no brackets around the string, so styled image and then backtick, that is actually an ES6 or ES 2015 capability, where we can take the function that gets passed inside these interpolations and defer them, and we create these components so that they will respond to props. And really, that's kind of the whole. As soon as we found that, we realized we had an API that was going to work for this library.
God, that's a really good library, Glenn.
Can I get you to change one thing that may not be obvious yet, but will, if anyone's watching this, that will trip them up in the future? You see where your spin animation thing returns a string?
Yeah.
I'm going to want you to put CSS, the word CSS, directly before the string. That becomes like a partial in style components.
Okay. As in before the backtick?
Yeah.
So I'll have to import that.
Yeah, same as keyframes.
Okay, so we'll import CSS.
That's doing the same thing as styled image. So that's the same logic that actually, because logo spin is just a string and time is just a number, it works just as a normal string. But in general, if you're going to be refactoring these things, it's better to be calling CSS. Also, with the next version of style components, that'll let us do optimizations that we wouldn't be able to otherwise.
Yeah. So whenever we're generating a string of CSS, we should apply the CSS helper, isn't quite the right word, the CSS function to it, I guess.
Tag, yeah.
Tag, that's it. That's the word I was looking for. Great.
And so you can actually, that does let you do one more advanced thing.
Yeah.
But you can actually take the props and the props time from where you've got it defined in logo and actually put it up into the helper. So the helpers can have functions as well.
This time could become props.time.
That's right.
And we might
And
want
then
to do
you
like
could-
or 20 to set the default. But
Yeah.
we can just do that. And then so down here, this just becomes, we're just literally going to call spin animation.
That's right.
I'll get rid of the time here. So anywhere where we've got these tags that we're passing a string to can take a function. And in here, I guess, because obviously spin animation could be used in any number of components, but it will just know to pull the props off whichever component is being used at or used on in that particular case, I guess. So here, because we're using this within logo, it's going to pull the props off the logo. Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
It feels like there's more risk now that I might create another logo somewhere else or another image that I want to use this spin animation on and forget that it takes this time prop. Whereas if it was on the logo, it might be a bit clearer to me looking at the code.
I think what you had before was certainly clearer in this case.
Yeah.
But it's a question of whether it makes more sense. Like, is the time, the prop called time, really intrinsically linked with the spinning animation? And therefore those two kind of go hand in hand and you can put them together like we have now. But if they're not, and I'd argue that they're probably not, then it makes more sense to use it as a function, as an argument to a function, as you had before.
Yeah.
But the point being that these fragments are just as powerful as any kind of style component thing.
Say I want to use style components, but say I'm using already some CSS layout library. Let's say Bootstrap for the sake of it. Am I able to just kind of apply extra class names to these like wrappers and headers and all these custom elements?
Yes. So if you want to jump back over the documentation, you should be able to find that. Although this is newer to the library, so it may not be as well documented.
Can I use CSS frameworks? You've thought of everything.
I can't take credit for the documentation. I really can't. There's been a team effort.
Okay, so we use style.button and we use this attributes function and give it any extra attributes we want to use. So there's in this example, style components will make sure that the outputted element has the class name as small along with all its custom, all this CSS as well.
That's right. And that attrs constructor can be used for anything. So if you your logo, both of your logos had the same alt attribute, alt prop. Again, where and the source is coming from an import, but you could use attrs to say, to define it up there. Again, there's a lot of places where you can do one or the other, and it's really up to you which kind of makes more sense, makes you feel like better captures what you're trying to do.
So you say alt logo like that, and then presumably attrs is still returning us this function, this tag that we then pass the CSS to. Could we take it further and do source logo?
Yeah, because it's a direct import,
which will be being webpacked by create React app, so I can get rid of those.
Yeah, and it really lets you kind of like one of the things I like to try to do with my like one of the things I want to focus on when I'm working on these things is I want my render methods to read as simply as possible. Like here we have wrapper, header, logo, intro, right? Like to me that's starting to really clean up what's there. And so the important information is the fact that some things are nested in each other, and the fact that the content is there, welcome to React and to get started, that sort of thing. But anything extraneous, anything that's like not really relevant to the render method, can live up in the definitions of these style components.
And so, final question. Say we've got this header and we have this heading 2 within it.
Yeah.
Say I want to style this heading 2 text to be red, for example. But I don't want to do it in the header because, for the sake of it, like subheader here. Say I've got that and I only want the heading 2 to be red. Would you add that as a nested styling within the header style div, or would you create a new style component called like heading?
No, I think generally if nesting works, the only constraint I would place is to use direct descendant, because if you use a direct descendant, it can't run away. It's not styling a H2 that's 5 levels deep. It's just the H2 directly beneath the header. And that way, if you've got a header or another component and it's got, say, three tags within it, then you can style them all in one block, but your styles don't leak.
Yeah, understood.
Cool.
Awesome. Look at that. Well, that's a super quick kind of introduction to style components. It's great. I mean, as also just in terms of like usage as a library, it's amazing just how straightforward it was. I mean, really, obviously as we've gone on, we've added some complexity and used some more of the kind of advanced features, but the fact that I was just able to open up my CSS file and literally copy and paste it across and just change, the class names to JavaScript components, that's great. And so I think that the migration path over is very straightforward as well, particularly given that you can use these attributes helper to apply like class names. You could easily imagine leaving some of your classes in CSS and moving certain things over and going very bit by bit if you wanted to kind of go all in. But, I can also imagine a world where you could easily add style components to one new page on your website and go from there. Yeah, thank you for taking the time to introduce me.
Not at all. I'm glad it was a success.
That's amazing. So thank you so much, Glenn. I will put all this code up on GitHub and have all the links both on the YouTube website where this video ends up and also on the JavaScript Playground where I'll do a blog post with some more information and things. I'll also leave links to Glenn's Twitter and website and style components and all the rest of it. Glenn also records amazing videos. Is it Front End Center? Frontend.center, right. I think. Highly recommended as well. So thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, no, thank you very much. Cheers.